The Indianapolis Motor Speedway. For over 3/4 of a century, it has stood as a monument to the great sport of auto racing. This 2.5-mile oval of concrete, steel, asphalt, and brick has withstood the test of time and the elements to emerge as a star maker and heartbreaker to the thousands who have been lucky and skillful enough to race for a spot in history. It remains as it began, a dream.
Gentlemen, start your engine.
It was 1908, the beginning of the automotive age. Henry Ford introduced the Model T. The General Motors Company was organized with the first car with interchangeable parts gaining national attention. Unnoticed at the time was the sale of 320 acres of farmland on the outskirts of Indianapolis, soon to be internationally recognized as the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. It was the dream of Hoosier auto manufacturer Carl Fisher to provide a testing ground for American car manufacturers, something that was already being done successfully in Europe. Fisher hoped the Speedway would even out the domination of European car manufacturers over the Americans. A fierce competitor himself in everything from bicycles to cars to balloons, Fisher's dream was to have car manufacturers racing against each other and then use what they learned to build better passenger cars. Fisher, propelled by James Allison and two of his friends, Arthur Newby and Frank Wheeler, paid $250,000 for that dream. It was February 8th, 1909. It was the beginning of the greatest spectacle in racing. It was the beginning of the Indianapolis 500. When the track opened for its first 500-mile race in 1911, Fisher's dream had already been altered by events the previous year. His desire to offer fans a variety of races throughout the year had failed.
The inaugural event, a balloon race in 1909, had been a dismal failure, and a motorcycle meet that year was a complete fiasco. Only the auto races run in August captured the attention of race fans in 1910 and 11, but they too were marred by two separate accidents that resulted in the Speedway's first 4 fatalities. It was a different Speedway that greeted race fans in 1911. Ruts, chuck holes, and flying stones contributed by the crushed stone and tar surface had been replaced with 3 million paving bricks of 10 pounds each. Fisher's $700,000 investment also included concrete retaining walls and guardrails. His dream of including a 2.5-mile road course within the oval was all but forgotten. Because racing crowds had been dwindling, one race was decided upon in May of 1911, 500 miles. 80,000 people filled the grandstands on opening day as the official starter waved a red flag signaling a clear course ahead. 40 cars ran 5 abreast down the straightaway as Carl Fisher drove the Stoddard-Dayton pace car, occupying what we now see as the pole position. All but one of the cars carried a riding mechanic. Ray Haroun had instead rigged up a rear-view mirror to keep informed of approaching drivers. As his number 32 yellow and black Marmon Wasp raced toward victory, accidents and poor conditions plagued the race itself. A spectacular crash took 3 cars out in the pits, while a riding mechanic was fatally injured in a separate accident. It was all Ray Haroun could do to keep his machine under control on the oil-slick surface.
When the race finally ended after 6 hours and 42 minutes, Haroun claimed victory for the Marmon Company. Nicknamed the Yellow Jacket, his machine averaged 74.602 miles an hour. Ray Haroon's prize money amounted to $14,000. It was the Speedway's first 500-mile race, but it was Ray Haroon's last. He retired from racing. He vowed never to race again, even for twice as much money. Haroon told Wilbur Shaw and others about his run later.
I figured I could save weight and get more speed by riding alone. The job of the mechanic in those days was to watch behind and notify the driver when other cars were trying to pass. They claimed that it'd be dangerous for me to ride alone, so I rigged up this little gadget.
The trick worked. The Marmon Company got its money's worth. It had more orders for passenger cars than it could fill. The race was successful for car manufacturers, drivers, and Carl Fisher himself.
The next few years brought changes. Riding mechanics were made mandatory, and the starting lineup was limited to one car per 400 feet of track, which meant only 33 starters. In 1912, the total prize money was doubled to $50,000. The crowds continued to swell, and so did the excitement surrounding the race. Artists and photographers have captured this period of Speedway history. For example, here in the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Hall of Fame Museum is a picture of the 1915 winner, Ralph De Palma. But he is depicted 3 years earlier in 1912 as he pushed this giant Mercedes toward the finish line with the help of his riding mechanic. His face is a picture of disappointment. You can see his frustration as Joe Dawson roared past to win the 1912 500.
A young rookie named Eddie Rickenbacker would finish 21st in his number 6 Firestone Columbus. In direct contrast to De Palma's defeat, consider the gaiety and informality depicted in these early photographs of French driver Jules Gou. 1913 brought with it the arrival of overseas drivers and teams, and with them, the differences of their customs. Those differences are captured in these photographs. Gou, the 25-year-old son of the superintendent in charge of the Peugeot factory, became the first European to win the 500-mile race in 1913. During the race, Gou consumed 4 bottles of champagne and then said, "Without the good wine, I would have not been able to win."
Barney Oldfield, in his Stutz, was the American hero as the European invasion continued in 1914. Rene Thomas and his Delage left the new American Maxwells and Duesenbergs several miles back as he crossed the finish line. The only accomplishment for the Americans that year came when Willie Carlson's Maxwell completed the full 500 miles on 30 gallons of kerosene, a total fuel bill of $1.80. It was the most economical high-speed performance in automotive history.
European dominance continued for the next few years. In 1915, Ralph De Palma received his long-awaited win in his privately owned Mercedes, while his rival, Dario Resta, had no trouble finding Victory Circle in a 300-mile version of the race in 1916. The race was shortened that year in response to fans who expressed a desire for shorter races, and fewer cars were available. That proved to be a one-time only occurrence.
However unwise some of Carl Fisher's decisions were at the time, there were also some innovative ones. 30 new wooden garages were opened in 1915, along with a wooden pagoda built 2 years earlier. For nearly 40 years, a pagoda structure served as a scoring stand housing Speedway officials and the press.
Changes also took place in the race itself. For the first time, in 1915, the starting position was determined by the speed of a one-lap qualification and not by the luck of the draw. Also, the cars were cut in engine size from 450 to 300 cubic inches to allow more competition. The Speedway was gaining national attention, and Carl Fisher's dream was becoming a reality. But the momentum gained by the Speedway during the early teens was abruptly halted in 1917 as war approached. The United States entered the war, and the Indianapolis Motor Speedway closed its gates.
Eddie Rickenbacker left racing for France to form the Hat in the Ring Squadron. He would become America's first flying ace and win the Congressional Medal of Honor.
Post-war patriotism affected the date of the race in 1919. Some politicians called the Memorial Day running unpatriotic. Fisher responded by moving the date to the day after. The purse was $50,000, and when the aerial bombs exploded on May 31st, 1919, the field was full. But the gaiety and excitement of this major event quickly evaporated. 3 lives were lost in tragic accidents, and more than 60 pit stops were made due to mechanical failure alone. The only real battle came at the beginning of the race between Ralph De Palma and Louis Chevrolet. But their speeds, in excess of 90 miles an hour, took them both out of the race early. The eventual winner, Howdy Wilcox, averaged 88.05 miles per hour.
The 1920s brought a renewed effort by the Speedway to keep race fans interested in the sport by forcing car owners to build brand new equipment. Unlike today, many of the same race cars were used year after year. The European automobile industry was recovering quickly from the war and had once again sent over several of their cars to race. Because engine size was reduced, Fisher got his wish, and the field was filled with several new machines. The time trials that year were increased from 1 to 4 laps. 1920 was also the year that local businessmen initiated the Lap Prize Fund, which paid the leader $100 for each lap led.
All of this helped to encourage the use of sophisticated, pure racing cars. A couple of manufacturers chose to continue to compete, notably the Duesenberg brothers, but the majority were no longer involved as a new era of racing began at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway.
1920 was also the year that accessory companies began to use the Speedway for publicity purposes. Tire companies began competing against one another along with spark plugs and batteries. Each paid for a piece of the action. Racing was becoming big business. When Gaston Chevrolet's Monroe race car crossed the finish line in 1920, he could expect the highest purse ever offered up to that time. Between the Speedway's purse and special cash awards, the total payoff was $93,550.
The Monroe win also signaled the first time since 1912 that an American car was able to capture the 500 win. America's reign would continue for the next 19 years.
The next few years brought considerable change in the whole philosophy of Indianapolis car racing.
In 1921, Ralph De Palma, with his riding mechanic, young Peter DePaulo, his nephew, led over half the race, but suffered mechanical failure and finished 12th. Crossing the finish line first was Tommy Milton in a brand new 8-cylinder Frontenac built especially for racing. The 1922 race saw an interesting combination as Jimmy Murphy roared into victory circle in a year-old Duesenberg chassis equipped with a Miller racing engine.
In 1923, the trend was set. Harry Miller, the designer of this magnificent machine, emerged as a race car manufacturer with no passenger car involvement. His HCS Special, driven by Tommy Milton, experienced some trouble early in the race when Milton's tight-fitting white kid gloves shrunk on his hands, causing a loss of circulation and blistering. Still, Tommy Milton managed to pull it off and became the first 2-time winner of the 500. Now, this change from passenger to race cars disenchanted Carl Fisher, who was beginning to lose interest in the Speedway. His frustration only doubled with the realization that he would again have to pour hundreds of thousands of dollars into refurbishing the track. So at the beginning of the 1923 race, he let it be known publicly that he was ready to sell the Speedway unless the automotive industry let him know that they still wanted the gigantic testing ground for their cars. Well, the response was tremendous, and there was no doubt that the 500-mile race would continue in the spirit in which it was envisioned. The Duesenberg brothers punctuated that promise when they entered 3 newly built racers in the 1924 race. Each was complete with the first centrifugal supercharger ever designed for an American car. For the next 3 out of 4 years, Duecies dominated the field. In 1924, L.L. Coram and Joe Boyer picked up a $60,000 purse after a sensational battle for the lead with Earl Cooper.
In 1925, it was Ralph De Palma's nephew and former riding mechanic Pete DiPaolo taking the honors as the first winner to average more than 100 miles an hour for the 500-mile distance. Pete loved to recount this win as he did in 1965.
Well, in my day, we had straight axles, straight frames, and when we hit the wall, we get such a terrific impact that we didn't walk away.
By this time, the rules regarding riding mechanics were lifted for the time being, and balloon tires made their debut along with front-wheel drive. 1925 was also the year that the uniquely built wooden pagoda burned down. This Speedway trademark was quickly rebuilt and ready for the 1926 race.
The Duesenberg brothers slacked off in 1926, more concerned with producing custom-built passenger cars than race cars. They finished 5th that year, giving up the winning honors to Harry Miller's car, driven by newcomer Frank Lockhart. 7 of the top 10 finishing cars were built by Miller under new Speedway guidelines designed to decrease speed. Under the new rules, the engines would be limited to not more than 91.5 cubic inches. Miller sold his race cars for from $10,000 to $15,000 each, front or rear drive. And those who couldn't afford a complete new car could buy a new Miller engine for a mere $6,000. Doozies and Millers continued to battle it out in the 1927 race as George Souders pulled off a 3rd win for the Duesenberg brothers.
But the most spectacular event of the 1927 race took place in the pits as driver Norman Batten guided his flaming car to a safe stop at the end of the pit area. His heroic actions saved crew members and spectators from certain injury.
Meanwhile, off the track that same year, Carl Fisher, his mind on other things, including the development of Miami Beach, was looking for a person to buy the Speedway. He found him in World War flying ace and former driver Eddie Rickenbacker. The sale, which went for an undisclosed amount of money, was the end of an era for the Speedway and the Indianapolis Classic, as it was called then.
Fisher and the other founders of the Speedway never again obtained the success they had known throughout their years as the Speedway's owners. Allison died of pneumonia 2 years after the track was sold. Newby 6 years later after a long illness. Frank Wheeler committed suicide in 1921. And Carl Fisher, his fortune lost after the 1929 market crash, died in a Florida hospital in 1939. His greatest accomplishment, turning 320 acres of Indiana farmland into the greatest spectacle in racing. When the track opened for practice in 1928, there was no doubt that the new owner, Eddie Rickenbacker, was going to leave his own mark on Indianapolis. He became racing's best spokesman.
Well, high compression engines, for instance, 4-wheel brakes, front-wheel drive, straight 8 engines, multiple carburetors, even the rear vision mirror. They all appeared first on the famous Indianapolis Motor Speedway.
The race fans that year weren't as interested in the development of racing or the Speedway as they were in mourning the loss of the 1926 winner, Frank Lockhart. Lockhart was killed in this accident at Daytona Beach, Florida. He was trying for the world's measured mile record. He lost control of the machine as it flipped end over end, throwing Lockhart from the vehicle. He was killed instantly.
At Indianapolis that year, drivers and fans alike were reminded of Lockhart's accomplishments when his one-lap record was broken by Cliff Woodbury, who turned a lap at speeds in excess of 124 miles an hour. Leon DeRay broke Woodbury's record shortly thereafter at 124.018 miles an hour for a single lap, a record which stood for 8 years.
1928 was also the year that Louis Meyer was recognized as a contender for the checkered flag. A mechanic for Wilbur Shaw a year earlier. After some fast talking, Meyer was able to get the financial backing he needed in 1928 to beat out Shaw and drive one of the fastest cars at the track, a Miller Special. His aggressiveness was paid off with the first Indianapolis win of his career. Even his wife, June, was surprised.
I didn't know even in 28 that he had a car. And I had picked up a wrecked car on the road, and the mechanic said, fixed it up for me, and I said to one of the mechanics, let's run up to see Eddie race in Reading. When we got up to the racetrack in where Eddie was racing, I heard them announce over the radio that give Eddie Meyer the hand, the brother of the winner of the Indianapolis race. And that's the first I knew that he had a car to drive.
Louis Meyer almost made it 2 in a row in 1929, but his car stalled on the last pit stop. Ray Keach took the honors that year as Louis had to settle for second. Later, he talked about the camaraderie in the racing fraternity in the 1920s and 30s.
There was quite a nice bunch of boys, and we had, I was a little different. At noon, every day at Indianapolis, Pete DiPella had his baseball team, Leon DeRay had his, and I was on one of the teams one time and the other time on somebody. And we played baseball for an hour and a half to 2 hours every day in the infield by the garages. You don't see any of that anymore. Standing on the Speedway course where the wall was and the tunnels that went under the track were full of water, clear as crystal, and we just strip off and go swimming all summer.
Sweeping changes came in the 30s. Riding mechanics were back in and superchargers out. The semi-stocks were in. Rickenbacker was hoping to get auto manufacturers back on the track. The field was up to 40 cars. The response from automobile companies was terrific, but on race day, they were no match for the custom racing equipment. A spectacular crash on the 23rd lap set off a chain reaction accident when Red Roberts skidded in the northeast turn and was hit by Babe Stapp. Deacon Litz hit Marion Tressler, while Lou Morris, spinning to avoid the crash, straddled the wall. Luckily, the only injury was to Litz's mechanic, who suffered a gash in the head. Other injuries were minor. Billy Arnold, in his Miller Hartz machine, led all but the first 2 laps of the race and won an easy victory. There is one accomplishment of the semi-stocks during this period that shouldn't be overlooked. It was the performance of the Cummins Company diesel-powered engine. In the 1931 race, Dave Evans was able to drive his diesel-powered machine non-stop on 33 gallons of fuel. He finished 13th.
In the race itself, Wilbur Shaw avoided serious injury on the 60th lap when the car he was driving careened over the northwest turn wall. Freddie Winnet did the same while trying to avoid Shaw. The victory that year went to Louis Schneider in his Bose Seal-Fast Special. The semi-stocks would fare no better in 1932, as the Miller Hartz car would once again dominate the race, along with its driver, Fred Frame. During the early 30s, the Depression affected the Speedway as it did the rest of the country. While every other major racetrack in the country closed down during this time, Eddie Rickenbacker chose to keep the Speedway open. The crowds were down considerably for the 1933 race, and the receipts were even worse. Rickenbacker compensated the hard times by cutting the prize money from $70,000 to around $40,000. He was hoping to break even. He hoped to increase revenue by increasing the time trials to 10 laps instead of the usual 4. This became a source of irritation to the drivers, along with a decision Rickenbacker made concerning driver Howard Wilcox II, no relation to the 1919 winner. The Speedway owner would not allow Wilcox to drive in the 1933 500 because he was a diabetic. The other drivers threatened to strike if Rickenbacker didn't change his mind by the start of the race. The World War I flying ace did not back down. Wilcox owner put then rookie Maury Rose in as a substitute, and the other drivers took to their cars.
But the matter didn't end there. Moments after Louis Myers claimed his second Indy victory, Howard Wilcox filed a $50,000 suit against the Speedway for slander. The matter was settled out of court. The 1933 race was tragic in many respects. 5 drivers and mechanics were killed and several others injured. Lester Spangler and his riding mechanic, G.L. Gordon, were killed instantly in this crash. Their car rode up over the wheels of Malcolm Fox's machine in the number 1 turn. There was no victory banquet that year. Speedway officials, relieved that the month was over, concentrated on 1934 with an emphasis toward safety.
That quest for safer track conditions took the Speedway management through the later part of the 1930s. From 1934 through 1936, a number of safety guidelines were established. Cars in 1934 were restricted to not more than 6.5 gallons of oil in order to eliminate the possibility of leakage on the track. The lineup was again decreased from 40 to 33 cars. In 1935, fuel allotments were reduced to 42.5 gallons, and then in 1936 to 37.5 gallons. Still, the accidents and serious injuries continued. Rickenbacker then instituted changes on the track surface. A new concrete retaining wall was built on the outside edge of the turns to keep the cars from going over the walls. An inner retaining wall was removed and replaced with a safety apron to keep out-of-control cars away from the flow of traffic. Safety lights around the track were also installed during this period. Also, rookie tests were instituted, forcing first-time drivers to prove their ability. Meanwhile, all drivers at the time were being required to wear helmets. Bill Cummins, in his Boyle Products car, picked up the win in 1934. Kelly Patillo, in a Gilmore Speedway machine in 1935. And an overjoyed Louis Meyer became the first three-time winner in his ring-free machine in 1936. Meyer's 3 wins netted him around $80,000 total. Not nearly the payoff of more modern times.
I was born 50 years too soon. When a driver doesn't make it to the starting line and gets paid as much money as I had got in 3 wins, then you're born 50 years too late, too soon.
In 1937, one of the greatest drivers ever to take the wheel in hand, the Hoosier gentleman, Wilbur Shaw, drove his Shaw Gilmore racer into victory lane. While 1936 was a relatively safe year, 1937 was a different story. Several accidents occurred, including one when Overton Phillips crashed his car into the pits. Flames from the impact killed 2, and 3 others were seriously injured.
1938 brought with it the permanent return to one-man cars. The brick surface that gave the Speedway its name, the Brickyard, was now covered with the exception of the main straightaway. As always, race fans could expect to see a range of innovative race cars on opening day. This year's most unusual was the Miller entry. It was the Speedway's first rear-engine, 4-wheel drive with independent suspension. It never made the show.
The entire race was dominated by the number 23 car, the Bird piston ring machine, owned by Lou Moore and driven by Floyd Roberts. This machine literally dominated the 500-miler without faltering. Even the 1937 500-mile champion Wilbur Shaw was no match for this magnificent machine. Shaw had to settle for second. It was a different story for the one-time champion in 1939 as he picked up his second win. But the victory for Wilbur Shaw was bittersweet. A spectacular accident on the 107th lap sent Floyd Roberts' car cartwheeling over a barrier and into a wooden fence. Bob Swanson, who had lost control of his machine, rolled over and burned near a safety wall. Another car, driven by Chet Miller, crashed to avoid Swanson. Both Miller and Swanson were seriously injured. And for the first time since the start of the 500-mile race, a 500 champion was dead. Floyd Roberts, who had claimed victory just 1 year before, died from his injuries. The 1939 race would also be a great disappointment for the first 3-time winner, Louis Meyer. He was running second on lap 197 when he spun, blew a tire, and then hit the southeast wall. The impact threw him out of the car, and as Louis scrambled to safety, his hopes of becoming a 4-time winner went with him. 1939 was to be his last race. Meanwhile, in Victory Circle, Wilbur Shaw rejoiced in his second win. Shaw's Italian-made Maserati was the first foreign-made entry to win since 1919.
Other owners brought over several Maseratis to race in the 1940 event, but the experience and the skill of Wilbur Shaw was too much. He became the first driver to win 2 straight 500s.
Fire swept through the garage area on the morning of the 1941 race. Crews worked quickly to save what they could. When the fire was finally extinguished, it was a miracle that all but one of the starting race cars had been saved.
Wilbur Shaw's Boyle Maserati was one of them, but Shaw claimed that the fire cost him his win. He said that water from the fire washed away the markings on his car, indicating a bad wheel. He said that wheel found itself on the car, causing him to spin and crash. Shaw's misfortune became Maury Rose's good luck as he and starting driver Floyd Davis claimed victory. 7 months later, the U.S. entered World War II, and the Speedway, for the second time in its history, closed down.
The Speedway, the country had gone to war. Gradually, the grounds and track deteriorated. The track surface was filled with crevices and grass growing between the brick. Eddie Rickenbacker had founded Eastern Airlines by this time and was becoming less interested in the Speedway. When Wilbur Shaw approached Eddie Rickenbacker with the possibility of purchasing the Speedway, he was all too happy to sell. After a number of unsuccessful attempts to get the financial backing he needed, Shaw found the man to get the job done. Terre Haute businessman Tony Holman.
We bought the track in the fall of '45. I remember we settled the deal in the Indianapolis Athletic Club. I had a call from Gene Pulliam over at the Indianapolis Star-News, and I remember right after we signed the papers, I had a note to see him, and we went over to visit with him a little while. At that time, he was just as a few young people starting out, you know. He did say that we were having we'd have a lot of trouble on our hands, you know, with this Speedway.
But Tony Holman was an optimist. Along with Wilbur Shaw, he envisioned the Speedway as a great sporting event, one that would gain national attention. After paying a reported sum of $750,000 for the Speedway, Holman set his mind to refurbishing the dilapidated structure into something Indiana could be proud of. It was tough going. By the time the Speedway reopened for the 1946 race, 2 brand new double-deck steel and concrete grandstands greeted the race fans. The track was cleaned up, the weeds were pulled, and a full field of 33 cars were ready to go racing. Still, the morning of the race, Tony Holman was worried.
Some friends that night. I got up not too early and went down Kessler Boulevard. That's one of the main boulevards in Indianapolis. I didn't see a soul on the boulevard, and I thought, oh, Lordy, won't be anybody there today, you know. Really thought so. And the fellow I came with, he had a car that was going to be in the race that stayed all night with a fellow named Fritz Holliday. And Fritz said, well, we won't have any trouble getting to track. Well, I always go drive right in and get there. And we went down that road, and then some of these main artery highways coming into Indianapolis, where we had a hard time getting to them. They were just all bumper to bumper. They had their seats, the back seats of their car out sitting there playing gin rummy and whatnot along the road, and nothing moving. And then we kept circling the city till we finally got over to the west towards Terre Haute, you know, and we came in through some dirt roads.
The only worry Tony Holman had that day was how to get into his own Speedway. He finally made it, along with a giant crowd that was still pouring into the gates as the race was finishing. The Holman era had dawned with Wilbur Shaw as the president, and the race was an immense success. During the 1946 race, one car that captured the attention of race fans was the debut of the powerful front-drive Novi, named after a town in Michigan. Race fans poured out to see this powerful V8 supercharged beauty. With Ralph Hepburn in the cockpit, the Novi had already set a new one-lap record of 134.499 miles an hour. And it appeared that the new machine would run away with the race as it proved capable of leading the first 50 laps. But mechanical problems plagued the machine later in the race, and it had to be sidelined after 122 laps. Also sidelined early in the race was Paul Russo's twin-engine creation. This innovative machine found an early meeting with the wall and was the first car out of the race. Several other machines followed. By the end of the race, only 9 cars remained. The rest were victims of mechanical failure, due mostly to old age. The winning car was a 9-year-old 6-cylinder Thorn Engineering Special driven by George Robeson. It was also the first time that 3-time Indy winner Wilbur Shaw gave up his helmet for a microphone and, as the Speedway president, uttered the famous command, "Gentlemen, start your engines."
new equipment filled the track during the 1947 race. It was also the year that Tony Hallman made an effort to deal with the growing problem of traffic control. Race fans were able to gain access into the track more efficiently through the use of new gates and newly constructed roads that could accommodate 21 lanes of traffic at a time. Another development off the track was a threatened strike by ASPAR, a drivers, owners, and sponsors association. They said if the Speedway didn't meet their demands for a percentage of the gate receipts, there would be no race. But when the green flag dropped on race day, 30 drivers were in their cars. The strike had kept a full field from qualifying. Cliff Brigier was the early leader in his Novi until he had supercharger trouble. Then the Blue Crowns took over, dominating the race. Maury Rose, in one of the most controversial finishes ever, took the checkered flag. His teammate Bill Holland slowed down after being given the easy signal from the pits. Believing he was a lap ahead, Holland allowed Rose to pass him on the 193rd lap, and Rose continued on to win the race. Bill Slater called the race for a nationwide radio audience. This is the last lap.
Again to look up the home stretch. And Rose will go by here this time, and this will be the last lap, eh, Noam? Here he comes. Here's Rose, hitting a tremendous clip. There's the white flag. It's the last lap for number 27. He's heading into the south turn. Take it, Mike.
Yes, sir. Here comes the blue streak. Maury Rose, number 27, in a Blue Crown Spark Plug Special. Out of the southwest turn into the short straightaway. Now right underneath our radio booth. Now into the southeast turn, slipping into the back stretch. And he is just now onto the turn and going up that straight 1 mile straightaway. In just a moment, he will be up there for Jimmy Shelton. We're going to hang on just as long as we can see him. He's averaging right now about 119 miles plus an hour. He's really pouring it on. And in just a few seconds, I believe he will appear at the north turn for Jimmy Shelton. Come in, Jim.
Well, is it South Bend in Chicago or Bridgeport? Well, definitely it looks like South Bend in Chicago, and we mean Maury Rose, because he is leading Holland now by quite a distance. Here he goes, folks. Number 27, Maury Rose. He goes in to the northwest turn, heading into the stretch, and here's Bill Slater.
We're all leaning out of the pagoda, looking up the home stretch now. The checkered flag is ready here at the finish line. Maury Rose is putting on a tremendous flash of speed as he nears the finish line. And there the checkered flag's waving, and Maury Rose is the winner.
In Victory Lane, Maury Rose received the Borg-Warner Trophy from actress Carol Landis, who became the first movie or television star to present the winning trophy. The 1948 race was almost a replay of a year earlier. The Novis, while charging to the front early in the race and keeping pace with the leaders during much of the run, fell out at the end. And the finish line was again the Blue Crown, Rose and Holland, in that order. The real tragedy of that year came during the practice, when veteran driver Ralph Hepburn, who replaced Cliff Brigier on the Novi team, crashed in the North Chute and was killed. 1949 saw even more tragedy for the Novi team. Duke Nayland was badly burned when his fuel tank erupted after hitting the North Chute wall. Some drivers had no option but to drive through the flames. Others took to the grass safety apron at the inner edge of the track. Later on, a fuel line break took out the second Novi, and once again, the battle for the lead went to Rose and Holland. This time, though, it was Holland in winner's circle. The Speedway distributed cash prizes of over $179,000. The onset of the 50s brought with it more and more 500 fans. The infield scaffolds grew larger and larger. Rookie Bill Vukovich did not make the race that year, but another rookie, Walt Faulkner, set a one-lap track record during the time trials of 136 miles an hour. He placed a respectable 7th during the race itself. The race became a battle between Holland, Maury Rose, and Johnny Parsons. While running in second place, Maury Rose stopped for fuel. Spilled gasoline set the car on fire. Rose tried to stay with the car until the heat forced him out. As soon as the fire was out, Rose climbed back into the driver's seat. Rain brought out the red flag at 345 miles. Winning honors went to Johnny Parsons in that rain-shortened race. Legend has it that Parsons, at the beginning of the race, knew that a crack existed in his cylinder block and it might sideline him at any moment, so he decided to charge for the lap money. Little did he know that Mother Nature would help him out and make him a winner. The 1951 race was the first one run in under 4 hours. 33 cars started, but only 8 were running at the finish. The newer and lighter rear drive machines dominated the track over the front drive cars. Once again, the temperamental Novi, which made a great showing during qualification runs, was left behind with mechanical problems during the race. Walt Faulkner once again picked up the 1- and 4-lap record that May with speeds of 138.122 miles an hour and 4 laps at 136.872 miles an hour. But on race day, it was Lee Wallard in his Ballinger Special that picked up the winning honors. Tony Holman and Wilbur Shaw invited Loretta Young to be in victory lane as Lee Wallard pulled in.
When 1952 rolled around, new cars dominated the spotlight. It was the year of the Roadsters with their offset engines and drive shafts. Alberto Ascari brought a 12-cylinder Ferrari from Italy, and there was an experimental turbocharged Cummins diesel driven by Freddie Agabation. The car was lightning fast and sat on the pole, but it was too heavy and did not prove successful during the race. New innovations that year included fuel injection and changes in the methods of torsion bar suspension. 1952 was also the year that Bill Vukovich emerged as a driver others would have to contend with. Driving the new fuel injection special, he easily broke the 1- and 4-lap records with speed surpassing 139 miles an hour. His first win was all but sewn up as Vukovich led most of the race. On the 191st lap, however, his steering broke, and an angry Vukovich climbed out of his cockpit just in time to see a car owned by J.C. Agajanian go into the winner's circle carrying Troy Ruttman, the youngest winner ever of the Indianapolis 500.
The Indianapolis Motor Speedway Radio Network was just beginning with Sid Collins as its chief announcer.
The second lap on, the only record that remains intact from last year is the one that was set in 1949 and wasn't bettered last year by Duke Neyland. He did 126.564 right after the pace lap got underway, the very first lap. But today, between Jack McGrath, Bill Vukovich, and Troy Ruttman, we've had brand new records set at every turn of the 10-lap margin. We'll be back with the exciting finish of the race in just a moment. But now a brief word from your announcer.
As you can tell, the now world-famous cue, "Stay tuned for the greatest spectacle in racing," had yet to be devised by Sid Collins.
Starter Seth Klein, for over 30 years, the official starter here at the 500-mile race, has number 98. Here's the checkered flag for Troy Ruttman.
Troy Ruttman was just 22 years old. Bill Vukovich made up for his disappointing loss by winning the next 2 500s. In 1953, he powered his fuel injection special in one of the hottest 500s ever. But Vukovich was unaffected by the soaring temperatures and took command of the race, giving up the lead only once during a pit stop. The second place that year was Art Cross, who the year before was named Rookie of the Year for the first time in Speedway history. Tom Carnegie was the Speedway public address announcer, and here interviews Augie Duesenberg in front of the Borg Warner Trophy.
In 1954, Vuki did it again, but this time it wasn't so easy. His car was showing the wear of old age. Unlike the year before, he spent much of his time playing catch-up. It wasn't until the 375-mile mark that Bill Vukovich grabbed the lead from Jimmy Bryan and never gave it back.
New names were now appearing at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Hollywood was a regular. It was fashionable to visit Wilbur and Tony. Rudy Valley, Jane Greer, Barbara Britton, all were regulars now. And new names were beginning to appear in the garage area and in the pits as well. The drivers are Jim Rathman and Pat Flaherty. Standing in the back, second from left, is a very young A.J. Watson. And on the far right, a very slim Andy Granatelli. They all made their appearances at the turn of the decade and now were regulars. A great many changes had taken place by the time the mid-50s rolled around. The Speedway lost another great when President Wilbur Shaw was killed in a plane crash only months after the 1954 500-mile race. It was Speedway owner Tony Holman who gave the command to start engines in 1955.
I tried to do it, sometimes just scream it out, and at one time they pushed all microphones this way, and the neck was clear back, bent over the back in the pace car there, and they had a rail where I couldn't go back any further, and I thought they were going to knock my teeth out, you know, when I had those things pushing those microphones at you. And anyway, I'm frightened to death at that moment because I always think that they can't start the race until I say that. And then I know that the minute that those words are said, I know that nothing in the world can stop the race. It's going. The engines are going. They're in their cars, and it's everything. And then we have to hold our breath for 10 or 20 laps to see that everything settles down and there's no catastrophe.
Unfortunately, Tony's wish would not be granted in 1955. At 125 miles, Bill Vukovich was trying to make it 3 in a row. He was 17 seconds ahead of second place. He was driving down the backstretch, preparing to pass 3 tail enders, when Roger Ward broke an axle, sending his car out of control. In an accident involving Al Culler, Johnny Boyd, and Bill Vukovich, Bill Vukovich was killed. It was a subdued crowd that watched the rest of the race as Bob Swikert pulled into victory lane, the winner of his first and only 500-mile race. For years, the AAA had sanctioned the Indianapolis 500, but suddenly they closed their contest board. Tony Holman helped found the United States Auto Club to sanction the 1956 race. Pat Flaherty was the fastest car at the track in his John Zink Special. He set a new 4-lap record of 145.5 miles an hour and a new 1-lap record of 146 miles an hour. From the pole, he ran all the way to the checkered flag, winning the 1956 Indianapolis 500. 1957 brought even more improvement to the track. The unique but now dilapidated pagoda was replaced by a 7-story concrete and steel control tower. And the pit area, more than once the scene of tragic accidents, was now totally reconditioned in the interest of safety. Over 1,300 feet long, the pits now protected teams from wayward cars with a massive concrete retaining wall. Improvements were complete with 14,000 new tower terrace seats. Besides all the improvements, race fans were talking about an innovative car design by George Sally. Sally determined he could get even more speed from his machine and better handling around the corners by giving the car a lower center of gravity. He determined that he could accomplish this by laying the engine on its side. The creation was known as the Belland Exhaust Special. The driver was Sam Hanks.
Sally's creation had worked, and as a tearful Sam Hanks drove into the winner's circle, he became the first driver since Ray Haroon to announce his retirement in the winner's circle.
It was a confused, disorganized start in 1958. The cars were required to leave the pits in single file and then line up in rows of 3 behind the pace car on the parade lap, which preceded the actual pace lap. It may have sounded good in principle, but the result was total confusion as the front row remained either 1.5 miles in front or behind the pace car, until finally they were given the green flag. Roaring into turn 3, Eddie Layson was out in front, and then trouble. Lou Palmer was then a rookie with the Indianapolis Motor Speedway radio network. These were his first words ever on that network.
Accident here. Car number 5. Car number 5, the Zink Special, is the first direct, another over the wall, and we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 cars piled up here on the northeast turn. The 54 Novi into the infield. Car number 19 in the infield, 68 now down into the infield, and it's almost impossible to identify the others. Out of car number 5 now is Ed Elysian, and car number 91 against the wall. That is all that we can see at the moment.
Pat O'Connor was killed. 8 cars were destroyed. 7 others were damaged. Jimmy Bryan, who eventually went on to victory, was still shaken as he posed for photographers in Winner's Circle. It was the second year in a row that George Sally's aerodynamic creation had won the 500. Watching the proceedings, relatively unnoticed at the time, was a rookie named A.J. Foyt, who finished 16th in the race. The 1959 Indianapolis Classic saw the dominance of car builder and mechanic A.J. Watson. Watson built 2 new upright engine cars for this event. One of the drivers was Roger Ward, who had no trouble warding off his competitors. One of the famous racing Unzers, Jerry Unzer's machine crashed and burned during practice. Jerry Enzer died from his injuries. The Speedway management continued their concern for safety. Roll bars and fireproof uniforms were mandatory in the 1959 race. Safety was then and continues to be the utmost concern at the Indianapolis 500. The Ward-Watson win was only a preview of what was to come at Indianapolis as the 60s dawned. A relatively unknown rookie named Jim Hurtubise shocked the Speedway establishment by qualifying on the second weekend of time trials nearly 3 miles an hour faster than the pole sitter Eddie Sachs at 149.056 miles an hour. Hurtubise proved that the 150-mile-an-hour barrier was now within reach. The morning of the race itself, one of the giant scaffoldings collapsed, killing 2 and injuring others. After that, the Speedway banned the scaffoldings. 1960 was a profitable race for car builder A.J. Watson. Once again, 2 of his cars were in the lead. The 59-liter Roger Ward, in a repeat performance, was battling it out with Jim Rathman. Lap after lap, they swapped the lead. Then, with just 3 laps to go, Ward developed tire trouble. He decided to slow down and settle for second rather than take the chance of not finishing it all. For Rathman, who had been a runner-up 3 times in his career, the 4th time was the charm. He brought home $110,000 that year and a new track record of nearly 139 miles an hour.
Larry Bisaglia was the first in line for the 1961 500. He, like other race fans, was there to see the 150-mile-an-hour barrier fall. They felt it would go to Tony Bettenhausen. He came very close during practice, and then, on a test hop, he crashed the car on the main straightaway. The man known as the Tinley Park Express was dead.
During the rest of the month, all eyes were on a tiny dark green car brought to the Speedway by world driving champion Jack Brabham. The car gave nearly 100 cubic inches in engine size away to its American rivals. Doubters said the rear engine was for men who like to be pushed around. But Brabham surprised the fraternity by qualifying 13th. Eddie Sachs sat on the pole with Don Branson and Jim Hurtubise filling out the front row. On the 49th lap of the race, Don Davis's oil tank split, sending him into a spin down the main stretch. Dazed, Davis jumped from his car, setting off a spectacular chain reaction accident. Jack Turner caught the wall and pirouetted over and over. Miraculously, no one was seriously injured. The race itself became a duel between Eddie Sachs and A.J. Foyt. With just 3 laps to go, Sachs saw a white strip appear on his tires. Fearing that it was the cord showing through, Sachs pulled out of the lead and into the pits. A.J. Foyt roared past to take the lead and win with a record speed of 139.13 miles an hour. Eddie Sachs, the clown prince of auto racing, had missed his chance. And A.J. Foyt had begun a new era. The 150-mile-an-hour barrier would finally fall in 1962 to Parnelli Jones driving a front-engine roadster. The American racing set was beginning now to recognize that the rear-engine car might be just the way to go. There were several in the field, including rookie Dan Gurney's car. On lap 18, Bob Christie bumped into Alan Crowe, sending Crowe into Jack Turner. And Jack Turner, like the year before, flipped end over end down the main stretch. The checkered flag came out, the second time in 4 years for Roger Ward. By 1963, the rear-engine contingent realized that they needed an engine suited to running in the back of the car with enough horsepower to win. Dan Gurney convinced the Ford Motor Company to get together with the Lotus designer Colin Chapman. The result was the Lotus powered by Ford, and one was assigned to Dan Gurney, the other to world driving champion Jimmy Clark in his first Indianapolis 500. On race day, Eddie Sachs, always the comedian, marched with the Gordon Pipers. Parnelli Jones, in a car owned by J.C. Agajanian, accepted the challenge and sat on the pole with a new track record of 151.153 miles an hour. Just after the start of the race, one of the Novis, driven by rookie Bobby Unser, hit the wall in the first turn. Unser was not seriously injured. Jones and Clark battled lap after lap. Then, the track surface became slick with a coating of oil. Officials traced the oil to a leak on the oil tank, mounted outboard on the left side of leader Parnelli Jones's car. Car owner J.C. Agajanian ran to the chief steward Harlan Fengler and convinced Fengler that the oil level was already below the level of the crack and would therefore not leak further. The chief steward, who was about to black flag Jones off the track, relented, and Parnelli Jones won the race in record time, closely followed by Jimmy Clark.
By 1964, nearly half of the 500 field had converted to the rear-engine cars. Many of the new engines were using gasoline rather than alcohol, and the rules permitted the cars to carry an unlimited supply of fuel. Many of the cars were, in fact, capable of finishing the race with just 3 pit stops. Jimmy Clark shattered the previous year's track record by over 7 miles an hour in qualifying. As the green flag dropped, Clark jumped into a substantial lead. And as Clark was beginning his 3rd lap, a young sports car driver named Dave McDonald, in a radically designed car, lost control, coming off the northwest turn, and slammed into the inside wall. An hour later, the announcement was made at the track.
It is with deepest regret that we make this announcement.
Driver Eddie Sachs was killed instantly. Dave McDonald would die later that afternoon. Instantly, Sid Collins delivered Eddie's eulogy on the worldwide radio network.
Some men try to conquer life in a number of ways. These days of our outer space attempts, some men try to conquer the universe. Race drivers are courageous men who try to conquer life and death, and they calculate their risks. And in our talking with them over the years, I think we know their inner thoughts in regard to racing. They take it as a part of living. It is God's will, I'm sure, and we must accept that. We're all speeding toward death at the rate of 60 minutes every hour. The only difference is that we don't know how to speed faster, and Eddie Sachs did. And so since death has 1,000 or more doors, Eddie Sachs exits this earth in a race car.
It was an hour and 42 minutes before the cars were back running on the track. Jimmy Clark was a front runner until the 120th mile, when his suspension collapsed. The Flying Scot kept the car under control in a brilliant display of driving. He drove it safely to the grass on the first turn. Foyt and Jones battled for the lead, then Jones made a pit stop. As he left the pits, his car caught fire. At the south end, he bailed out of the car. Jones was not injured. His car was through. A.J. Foyt in his front-engine car scored his 2nd win, setting a new track record of 147.35 miles an hour.
As a result of the Sachs-McDonald crash, numerous changes were made for the 1965 race. Gasoline was banned. 2 pit stops were made mandatory. Pit fuel tanks could no longer be pressurized, and Firestone and Goodyear developed fuel cells to prevent fires. A.J. Foyt qualified for the pole at 161.233 miles an hour. The rear-engine cars of Jimmy Clark and Dan Gurney filled out the front row. Starting 4th was Rookie of the Year, Mario Andretti.
I've been dreaming about coming to this place since I was 13 years old, back in Italy. That's when I started racing. And, well, now I'm here, and it certainly is a realization of a dream, and I'm qualified. Now, come race day, I'll be looking for the short way around.
It was a clean start. And a good, smooth race as Jimmy Clark showed the way. Only one yellow light on the 115th lap when Bud Tinglestead lost the wheel and hit the northeast corner wall. Jimmy Clark averaged over 150 miles an hour to win with a new track record, a new Ford engine, and the first time ever for a rear engine car. By 1966, the U.S. racing fraternity recognized what the Europeans had known for years. A car with an engine in the rear but forward of the front wheels, with the fuel tanks installed for balance, was vastly superior to the standard front engine car. And Europeans like Jackie Stewart and rookie Graham Hill found out there was money to be won at Indianapolis. Perhaps most important of all, the rear-engine cars were of a safer design using more modern technology. And in the true American tradition, the Indy mechanics and designers were rapidly expanding on the technologies available to them. Mario Andretti pushed the previous year's track record up another 4 miles an hour to 165.8. In doing so, the Indy sophomore but defending national champion captured the pole and would lead a front row of all rear-engine cars to the green flag. But as he did so, Billy Foster was pinched off to the outside wall. That began an 11-car chain reaction accident that included contenders like Foyt, Gurney, and stock car ace Cale Yarborough. The race was stopped. The most serious injury was to A.J. Foyt's thumb. The drivers and crews waited an hour and 18 minutes for the track to be cleaned up. When the green flag came out again for the restart, it was only out for 10 seconds. Then Johnny Boyd hit the wall in the first turn. By the 6th lap, only 21 cars were able to answer the green flag. And Jimmy Clark began to show the power of his machine. It appeared that he was not to be caught at any time during this 500-mile race. On the 65th lap, Clark, while leading, spins but recovers. Clark continues in the lead. And on the 87th lap, spins again. Lloyd Ruby leads for 68 laps, but then his engine lets go. The crowd watches as Ruby rolls into the pits. His day is done.
Jimmy Clark, Jackie Stewart, Al Unser, and Jim McElreath dominate the race. Then Al Unser loses it, tags the wall, and his day is over. Graham Hill passes Jimmy Clark, while race leader Jackie Stewart's car gives up. The Scotsman walks back to the pits. Graham Hill is the leader and rolls on for the 200 laps, 500 miles. The first rookie to take the checkered flag since George Souders in 1927. Hill had a little trouble finding victory lane, but he was, after all, a rookie at Indianapolis.
In 1967, silence dominated the Indianapolis Motor Speedway in the presence of a new car designed and built almost in secret under the guidance of Andy Granatelli. The car was powered by a Pratt & Whitney J3 turbine engine. It was so quiet that the driver could actually hear his brake pads touching their discs. Mario Andretti qualified for the pole, but it was Parnelli Jones's turbine that jumped into the lead. On the 19th lap, a Hoosier rain shower drifted across the Speedway. The race was stopped for only the third time in its history. Then the race was postponed to the following day.
Gentlemen,
When racing resumed, Parnelli Jones and his turbine-powered machine still the combination to beat.
It was a busy day as Wally Dallenbach spins in the main straightaway. Then Yarborough spins up in number 4, sending others to the grass. With just 4 laps to go, Parnelli is slowing down. A $3 ball bearing in his gearbox ended Parnelli's chance for a second victory.
A.J. Foyt takes the lead, but on the last lap senses something is wrong. Cars spin in front of him on his approach to the final turn. Bobby Grimm, Chuck Hulse, all spinning. A.J. Foyt picks his way through and on to the checkered flag, standing on his brakes just before the finish line to win his 3rd Indianapolis 500. In 1968, the crowds turned out as Indy turned Hollywood. Paul Newman and Robert Wagner came to the Speedway to film the motion picture Winning, the 3rd time a major motion picture was shot on location at the great track. The turbine cars were back with severe restrictions placed on their engines, but Joe Leonard pushed the track record up 3 more miles an hour to 171.5. Second fastest was the turbine of Graham Hill. Bobby Unser was on the outside of the front row with a 4-cylinder Offenhauser, but mounted with a turbocharger, his hope of combating the power of the turbines and the Ford V8s. Again, the turbine ruled, but again, Lady Luck struck. In a virtual repeat of 1967, the turbine severed a fuel shaft and rolled to a stop with just 22 miles to go. It was Bobby Unser's Turbo Offie that roared past Joe Leonard's disabled car to take the checkered flag and the additional honor of having his car as the centerpiece for the motion picture Winning.
With the turbine engine further restricted by the rules, designers in 1969 looked to the turbocharger to help boost their engine power. They were also working with aerodynamics and suspension tricks to make their cars even faster. Colin Chapman's new design, a Lotus with 4-wheel drive for Mario Andretti. But during practice, Andretti lost control of the car and slammed the wall, suffering facial burns and destroying the Lotus. In qualifying, A.J. Foyt pushed his car over the 170-mile-an-hour barrier to sit on the pole. Mark Donohue qualified in 4th place for Roger Penske. Mario Andretti drug out a Bronner Hawk and with very little practice qualified 2nd quick. In the race itself, A.J. Foyt jumped into the lead, but at the halfway point, stopped in the pits 22 minutes to repair a split manifold. Popular Texan Lloyd Ruby now took the lead. But 5 laps later, making a routine pit stop, Ruby pulled away from the pits with his fuel hose still attached, ripping out the side of the car and ending his race for the checkered flag. Mario Andretti thundered into the lead. Andretti wins at a new record speed of 156.8 miles an hour. "84 cars were entered to compete in the 1970 500-mile sweepstakes. Al Unser, with a turbocharged V8 and a hint of aerodynamics, qualified for the pole in record time, 170.221 miles an hour. He shared the front row with Johnny Rutherford and A.J. Foyt. As the field came off the last turn on the pace lap, suddenly Jim Malloy, from his position on the outside of the 3rd row, encountered suspension failure and spun, slamming the wall. The rest of the field got by safely.
The red flag was displayed, stopping the race. As the race was restarted, Al Unser and Johnny Rutherford battled for the lead. Voigt was in fourth, Mark Donahue running in fifth. Al Unser led the first lap. Al Unser makes his pit stop, and now A.J. Voigt leads the race. As Al comes out of the pits, Johnny Rutherford stalls on his stop. It would be 8 minutes before he restarted. Then A.J. Voigt makes his pit stop. Now, Lloyd Ruby has the lead. But Ruby's in trouble as fire appears at the back of his car. His race is over. On the 87th lap, Dick Simon spins in the pits. Al Unser is back in the lead, fighting with A.J. Voigt and Mark Donahue. On the 172nd lap, Roger McCluskey spins with Ronnie Buckman and Sammy Sessions. Then as crews clean up the accident, Jerry Grant spins into the accident area. Al Unser now has the lead all by himself. And Al Unser earns his first Indianapolis 500-mile race win. In 1971, Team McLaren had devised new aerodynamics and a true wing to comply with stricter rules. McLaren also decided to sell customer cars. A key customer was Roger Penske with his sports car ace, Mark Donahue. In qualifying, Donahue, a Brown University graduate, chose a setup that was not dialed into the chassis. Donahue was disappointed with his run despite breaking the previous year's record by nearly 7 miles an hour. Donahue shared his setup with Peter Revson. Revson ordered the changes on his McLaren and took the pole in a record speed of 178.69 miles an hour, or more than 7 miles an hour faster than the previous year. As starter Pat Vadan waved the green flag, Mark Donahue rocketed into the lead. 27 miles into the race, Steve Krisilov's engine blew, spraying the track with oil and sending Mel Kenyon spinning into the wall. Kenyon started to climb out when he saw Gordon Johncock sliding for him through the same oil. Johncock ricocheted off Kenyon and into Mario Andretti. Mark Donahue leads, running the fastest lap of the race. 1 lap later, Donahue retired with broken gears. In the last quarter of the race, Mike Mosley lost a wheel, causing a chain reaction with Bobby Unser and Bill Vukovich. Mosley hit the parked cars from a previous accident. Al Unser had the lead and raced for his second checkered flag in a row to become the first man to roll into a new victory lane in front of the master control tower. The new race record was now 157.7 miles an hour. The qualifying speeds continued to climb the next year. Bobby Unser in a Dan Gurney Eagle took the pole at 195.9 miles an hour, sharing the front row with Donahue and Revson. Larry Bazalia continued his streak at being the first in line at the 500. A.J. Voigt's engine faltered and then finally started as the field pulled away. Bobby Unser jumped from the pole position into the early lead. The giant wings on the back of the cars allowed wheel-to-wheel competition all the way around the course. Bobby Unser's day ends as his distributor lets go. Now, Mike Mosley has the lead. But in the exact same place as last year, Mike Mosley loses control and crashes. Now, a new system of pacer lights spaced around the racetrack helps slow the drivers down. They must follow their number on the lighted panels. Teammates Gary Bettenhausen and Mark Donahue make an un-Penske-like pit stop.
Now Jerry Grant has the lead. Gary Bettenhausen goes back in front, and then his machine fails. Grant is once again the leader. Feeling that Grant is a lap out in front, his teammate Bobby Unser tells him to slow down and think. Mark Donahue takes the lead again. The Penske car sets a blistering pace, winning with a new race record of 162.96 miles an hour. Second on the track was Jerry Grant. But the officials ruled a 12-lap penalty because he refueled from his teammate's pit tank on the 189th lap. The mistake cost the team $72,000. 1 year later, on May 28, 1973, leaden, rain-filled skies drizzled and delayed the start of the 500-mile race. As Johnny Rutherford led the field into the green flag, in mid-pack, cars bounced against one another, and the resulting accident sent Salt Walther cartwheeling through the air to land upside down in the first turn. Twelve cars were damaged. The red flag was displayed, stopping the race. Then the skies opened up and it began to rain. The 500 fans amused themselves in many ways. The Speedway Museum, just outside the front gate at 16th and Georgetown, was extremely popular. In the pits, the crews waited for the track to dry while playing soccer. The race would be postponed for 2 days. The downtime allowed many of the damaged cars to be repaired, and all but Salt Walther were ready when the race began on May 30th. Bobby Unser jumped into an early lead. Pole sitter Johnny Rutherford dropped back to fourth. In turn 4, Peter Revson lost it and smacked the wall. Back to green, Bobby Unser and Johnny Rutherford battled for the lead. On the 37th lap, A.J. Foyt rolled into the pits, out of the race, with a broken connecting rod bolt. Joe Leonard loses control, spins, but saves the car. Now, Al Unser goes into the lead. On the 57th lap, Swede Savage loses control. Debris is scattered all along the main stretch off of the fourth turn. The red flag flies again. When the race is resumed, Unser again leads. Then his mount fails him. Now Gordon Johncock picks up the lead. Over the speedway, the skies darken. The yellow light is turned on. And finally, as the rain increases, the red flag is displayed. 10 cars pull to the side and wait for the race to restart. But as darkness gathers, Gordon Johncock is declared the winner of a race that only went 332.5 miles. Swede Savage would die of his injuries 1 month later. It was a race all wanted to forget. In 1974, A.J. Foyt had the pole to lead a front row made up of Foyt, Wally Dallenbach, and Mike Hiss. Dallenbach jumped into the lead and ran the fastest leading laps ever, 191.408 miles an hour. But the pace was too hot. Dallenbach burned a piston and was out of the race on lap number 3. Now Johnny Rutherford moves up from his 25th starting position. and begins to chase the leader, A.J. Foyt. Foyt and Rutherford pit at the same time, but A.J. has trouble on this stop. It goes long, and Rutherford leaves ahead of Foyt. Jan Opperman spins in the north end. Now, A.J. Foyt leads. Johnny Rutherford is in second. Al Unser runs third. But Al Unser's day is shortened with a blown engine. Foyt has his engine problems as well as it begins to smoke. The black flag comes out for car 14, A.J. Foyt. In the pits, officials look the car over. A.J. Foyt's day is done. Johnny Rutherford now leads Bobby Unser and Bill Vukovich. And Johnny Rutherford wins the 1974 Indianapolis 500.
By now, the 500-mile race was becoming a family tradition. In 1975, Bill Vukovich, son of the great champion Gary Bettenhausen, Dwayne Carter, and his son Pancho. And Mom Unser, whose racing family rewrote the record books. A.J. Foyt started on the pole for the 1975 500 at 193.9 miles an hour.
On the start, Johncock took the lead from Foyt. The two great drivers battled back and forth. Foyt then took the lead back. On the 11th lap, Gordon Johncock's engine gives up, and Johncock is out of the race. A.J. Foyt leads. Then Wally Dallenbach takes over and leads at the halfway point in the race. A.J. Foyt runs out of fuel on the racetrack and coasts into the pits. In front of the new VIP suites, Tom Sneva flips after hitting another car. The safety designs of the United States Auto Club work. Tom Sneva is not seriously injured. His car is totally destroyed. During the yellow light for Sneva's accident, Wally Dallenbach picked up some paper into the coolers of his machine. He had run from 21st to 1st and controlled the race. The little bit of paper overheated his engine and burned a piston. Dallenbach was out. On the 165th lap, Bobby Unser took the lead from Johnny Rutherford. Just a few laps later, rain sweeps across the giant Speedway oval. In a driving downpour, Bobby Unser wins. Johnny Rutherford is second, Foyt third, and Pancho Carter makes his dad proud by finishing fourth. A wet Tony Hulman celebrated his 30th year of ownership and Bobby Unser's second 500 win. The Indianapolis Motor Speedway has become like a living thing, growing each year with new grandstands and developments. In 1976, the new Hall of Fame Museum was opened inside the track between the first and second turn. This museum now large enough to hold the entire Hulman collection. Other history was being made at the track that year as Janet Guthrie arrived, a sports car driver attempting to be the first woman ever to drive in the Indianapolis 500. Janet would not make the race in 1976. Johnny Rutherford was on the pole alongside of Gordon Johncock and Tom Sneva. As the green flag came out, Johnny Rutherford was the leader. Then A.J. Foyt moved up and began to battle with J.R. Foyt moves into first place. Mario Andretti is making a charge up from 19th, now running 7th. Then Pancho Carter takes over the lead. Then Wally Dallenbach. Then he's passed by his teammate Gordon Johncock. Tom Sneva leads. Then Johnny Rutherford once again. Johnny Parsons Jr., the son of the 1950 winner, steers a three-wheel car to the pits. A.J. Foyt is back in the lead. A front moves through the Indianapolis area. The breezes freshen, the winds pick up, and Johnny Rutherford picks up his pace. He catches and passes A.J. Foyt. At the halfway point, 100 laps, rain begins to pour. The yellow flag comes out, and then the red flag. The race is stopped on the 103rd lap. Drivers and crews wait for the track to dry. 2 hours later, it appears ready to go, and then it rains again. Johnny Rutherford becomes the first man in history to walk into victory lane as he scores his second Indianapolis 500 win. It was a much drier day 1 year later on the first day of qualifying. May 14th, 1977. A.J. Foyt, in a prophecy of what was to come, was the first out to qualify. He was shooting for the 200-mile-an-hour barrier. Disappointed with 193.4 miles an hour, he still had a good shot at winning. Tom Sneva qualifies, becoming the first man ever to poke the nose of his car through the 200-mile-an-hour barrier. And history is made as well, as Janet Guthrie qualifies 29th, the first woman ever to qualify and drive in an Indianapolis 500.
During the qualifying, Formula One ace Clay Regazzoni loses control in the north end, crashes heavily. Surprisingly, Regazzoni was not injured. He would later qualify in 29th position.
As the green flag flew, Al Unser jumped into the lead. Then Gordon Johncock took over. The defending 500-mile race champion, Johnny Rutherford, was the first out of the race, followed shortly thereafter by Janet Guthrie. Now, A.J. Foyt and Gordon Johncock begin a fight for first place. Attrition begins to affect the race. Danny Ongais is out. So is Bobby Unser. A.J. Foyt pits, 18 seconds in the lead. Then Gordon Johncock roars past to pick up a lead of 15 seconds over Foyt. There are 16 laps to go. Without warning, Gordon Johncock's engine lets go. Alone, A.J. Foyt goes on to win, becoming the first man to win 4 Indianapolis 500. Tom Sneva finishes in second place, 35 seconds back.
When I dream about the moonlight on the wall.
In the fall, after the 1977 race, Tony Holman passed away. Joe Cloutier became the president of the Speedway, and Tony's widow, Mary Holman, became the chairman of the board. On race day, she replaced Tony, giving that traditional command. It was an all 200-mile-an-hour front row that answered the green flag with Tom Sneva as the pole sitter. But Danny Ongais jumped past Sneva and into the lead. It began a chase as Sneva tried desperately to catch Ongais. Then Al Unser, from second place, moved up to challenge Danny Ongais. Both Ongais and Unser pitted together, but Al Unser was out first. A few laps later, Danny Ongais was out with turbocharger problems. Janet Guthrie, in a smooth and clean race, moves into the top 10. And Al Unser, unchallenged, goes on to win his 3rd Indianapolis 500. But there's an important victory here for Janet Guthrie as well. She finishes in 9th place. By 1979, the race car designers had developed a new concept of aerodynamics called ground effects. Al Unser's new car was vastly different than the rest. Most of the field, like Rick Mears, had ground effects packages. Due to a misunderstanding in the qualifying, 35 cars were allowed to start this race. As the green flag came out, Al Unser jumped into the lead. Al Unser's car appeared to be unbeatable. Then suddenly smoke and fire at the back of the car. And Al Unser's race was over. Now, the Penske team, Bobby Unser and Rick Mears, battle for first place. Both cars go to the pits together for Penske patented pit service. Bobby Unser comes out the leader, followed by Mears, A.J. Foyt, and Danny Ungaius. Rick Mears goes to the lead. Tom Sneva charges for the front, then something breaks on the car and he hits the wall. For the first time in the history of the race, the field bunches up behind the pace car under the yellow flag. When the green flag flies again, it's a smooth run to the finish for Rick Mears as he wins his first Indianapolis 500. It is also the first win for Penske cars in his new PC6.
Well, at Indy in '79, you know, I think one of the main things I remember about it and what made it, you know, a little bit different. First off, it was the first win, which makes it special, and it'll always have a special place by being the first win. But I think one of the main things about it is it happened so early in my career. The fact that, you know, my second time there, I didn't really appreciate it. I didn't really understand it. And it didn't really impress me that much. You know, it was another race because I hadn't been in it that long. So in that respect, you know, it is not probably held as high as the other wins, except for the fact that it was the first one, which always will be there.
The 80s decade opens with Johnny Rutherford taking Al Unser's ride with Chaparral. 1980, it was all Lone Star JR. The qualifying speeds were down as the officials tried to reduce straightaway speeds by reducing engine turbo boost to 48 inches. The technique works. Johnny Rutherford qualifies for the pole at 192.2 miles an hour. A series of accidents slows the average pace of the race, but Johnny Rutherford outlasts the challenge of 9 different drivers, 5 of them former 500 winners. Johnny Rutherford wins the 1980 500 and joins Louis Meyer, Wilbur Shaw, Maury Rose, A.J. Foyt, and Al Unser as a 3-time winner. His race average, 142.8 miles an hour, down substantially. And Mark Donahue's 1972 record of 162 miles an hour still stands. Lone Star JR gives rookie Tim Richmond a ride down toward winner's circle, but drives in alone. There were a record 105 entries for the 1981 Indianapolis 500. Bobby Unser took the pole with an average speed of 200.5 miles an hour. Unser led the early laps. Defending champion Johnny Rutherford fell out early with fuel pump problems. As Rick Mears made his routine stop on lap 58, suddenly fire broke out in the pits. Mears and several of his crew members were injured. When the green flag came out again, in turn 4, Danny Ungaius slammed into the wall. He suffered leg fractures and internal injuries. On the 141st lap, in turn 4, Gordon Smiley slammed the wall. Under the yellow flag, first place Bobby Unser and second place Mario Andretti both pitted. As they rolled out of the pits to join the pack behind the pace car, both cars appeared to pass cars in the lineup, and officials began to contemplate a penalty for Unser and Andretti. Scott Brayton adds his car to a very expensive parking lot in turn 1. Bobby Unser took the checkered flag, but the race didn't end there. The next morning, the officials ruled that Bobby Unser illegally passed cars on lap 149. Mario Andretti was declared the winner, and the official photographs were taken with Andretti.
I got the news this morning just right after 8 o'clock from Jim McGee. I just didn't know what to say, and it's going to take a while for me to get all my thoughts together correctly.
It took a USAC appeals board time to get their thoughts together as well. And after a lengthy hearing, after all parties concerned were heard, Bobby Unser was reinstated as the winner of the 1981 Indianapolis 500. 109 cars were entered. 89 actually showed up at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway as the crews worked 24 hours a day in Gasoline Alley to prepare for the 1982 Indianapolis 500-mile race. At better than 207 miles an hour, Rick Mears had the pole. Alongside was teammate Kevin Cogan, A.J. Foyt on the outside. As the green flag came out, Cogan's car veered into Foyt and then was collected by Mario Andretti. Cogan's and Andretti's car were badly damaged. The red flag came out. Foyt was able to effect repairs. When the green flag flew again, it was A.J. Foyt, the leader of the race. Tony Bentonhausen crashes. Now, Rick Mears has the lead, followed by Gordon Johncock. A.J. Foyt falls by the wayside with gearbox problems. Rookie Danny Sullivan crashes in the north end. With Johncock and Mears making pit stops at the same time, the scene is set for a chase to the finish. It was one of the most exciting calls ever, the last lap on the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Radio Network.
Mears is right there, the white flag. It's a drag race. They're side by side. Johncock and Mears. Mears on the inside. Johncock, Mears forced down the little line. Run. Johncock cuts him off. Hey, this looks like the start of this race. Johncock, then Mears, they're in turn two. Now Gordy pulls away a little bit as Mears gets a little squirrely. Here they come. This is the final quarter lap. Johncock maintains the lead. The voice of the 500, Paul Page. Who's going to win it? Gordon Johncock off the fourth turn. Mears is right behind him. Johncock. Mears makes a try. Johncock wins it by less than 1/10 of a second.
It was an important win for the Patrick team and for Gordon Johncock. The 1973 winner was sensitive about that win since it was a rain-shortened race. Now, he was truly a 500-mile race champion. In 1983, it was the Italian rookie, Teo Fabi, qualifying at 207.395 miles an hour, sitting on the pole. Alongside in the front row, Mike Mosley and Rick Mears. When the green light winked on, Teo Fabi jumped into the lead. He was going to be tough to catch. Then, Roger Mears hit the wall in number one. Mears is all right. The car is badly damaged as his brother, Rick, screams past, still trying to catch the leader, Fabi. For the first time in his career, Bobby Rahal leads the Indianapolis 500. In the first turn, Johnny Parsons Jr. spins, taking Mario Andretti to the wall with him. Both drivers are safe. Tom Sneva now picks up the lead. Mike Mosley loses control, and Tom Sneva barely gets past. Al Unser Sr. and his son become the first father-son combination to compete against one another in an Indianapolis 500. In the closing laps, Big Al is in second place, and Little Al is off the leader lap, but is capable of slowing Sneva down. Finally, Tom Sneva gets by, takes the checkered flag, and wins his first Indianapolis 500, averaging 162.1 miles an hour and inching closer to Mark Donahue's record of 162.9. Tom Sneva was the first driver ever to run at 200 miles an hour officially at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. In 1984, the gas man became the first man past 210 miles an hour to sit on the pole. Alongside Howdy Holmes, the outside of the front row is Rick Mears. But at the green flag, Mears jumps into the lead and races at laps better than 200 miles an hour. Paul Newman in the pits watches his driver, Mario Andretti. Then in the fourth turn, Pat Bedard loses control. Incredibly, his only injury is a cracked jaw. Teo Fabi leads. Then Danny Ongayas. Al Unser Jr. picks up first place. Then Tom Sneva. Teo Fabi falls by the wayside. Gordon Johncock loses control and ricochets off both pit walls. He suffers a broken foot. Rick Mears is unchallenged and runs to the checkered flag, winning his second Indianapolis 500-mile race. Driving for Roger Penske. At 163.6 miles an hour, he breaks Mark Donohue's 1972 record. In 1985, it's production-based power that is on the pole in Pancho Carter's machine and alongside in Scott Brayton's car. Bobby Rahal is on the outside of the front row. Pancho Carter qualified at 212.5 miles an hour. But on the start, it's Rahal that makes the move first, and Rahal goes into the lead. Very quickly, first Pancho Carter, and then Scott Brayton fall out of the race. Bobby Rahal experiences trouble, and he falls by the wayside. Now, Mario Andretti is leading Danny Sullivan. Sullivan lines Andretti up and tries him in the first turn. Sullivan spins. Sullivan recovers, and the yellow light is out. On his own yellow, Danny Sullivan goes to the pit to check his machine and immediately back to the action. Rick Mears, the defending champion, is out with mechanical trouble. Rich Vogler spins and takes Tom Sneva to the wall. Neither driver seriously injured. Once again, it's Mario Andretti being chased by Danny Sullivan. Sullivan lines him up in the main stretch. Tries again, and this time on the 140th lap, gets past Mario Andretti for the lead. Sullivan is not to be stopped now and goes on to his first 500-mile race win. It's the second year in a row for the Penske team. Danny Sullivan averages 152.9 miles an hour on his road to victory.
And of course, just for me, you know, winning my first Indianapolis 500, just great thrill, but that spin will obviously stick out.
It's 1986. The Indianapolis 500 is 75 years old. It continues to grow. New garages now replace the old wooden structures that have served so well. The speeds continue to climb. Rick Mears sets a new track record of 216.8 miles an hour as he qualifies for the pole. On the final testing day, Dennis Firestone loses control and slams into the pit wall. Firestone is not seriously injured. Race day itself dawns overcast and cold. The rain begins to fall and continues throughout the day. The race is postponed to the following day. Again, it rains, and the race is put off until the next Saturday. As the race finally begins, the start is aborted. Tom Sneva hit the wall in the second turn. When the race finally gets underway, Michael Andretti takes the lead. Rick Mears chases, followed by Kogan and Bobby Rahal. Kevin Kogan works his way up and passes Rahal. Now Kevin Kogan has the lead. In the closing laps of the race, Arie Luyendyk crashes in the north end of the track. It will now be a sprint back to the green flag, just 5 miles to go of the 500. Kevin Kogan will lead Bobby Rahal and Rick Mears. As the green flag unfurls, Bobby Rahal hits his accelerator and goes past Kevin Kogan and into the lead. Bobby Rahal wins the 75th anniversary Indianapolis 500. His average speed, 170.722 miles an hour. A 7-mile-an-hour increase in the track record for 500 miles. The practice for the 1987 Indianapolis 500 set Mario Andretti as the man to beat in his new Lola, powered by a brand new Chevrolet racing engine. Andretti started on the pole and jumped into the early lead, but on the first turn of the first lap, Jose Legarza lost control, tapped Pancho Carter. The yellow flag came out with Mario Andretti as the leader. When the green flag flew again it was Mario Andretti. He dominated most of the 500, leading most of the laps. And then, as car owner Paul Newman watched on, suddenly he faltered on the main stretch. The engine stopped, and Andretti's day was done. Now, Roberto Guerrero picked up the lead as his wife Katie watched from the pits. Then, on his final stop of the 500-mile race, the clutch system failed. Guerrero could not pull away. His engine stalled. As the crew frantically started to try it, Danny Sullivan yelled at his teammate Al Unser as Unser roared into the lead in a one-year-old car. The final laps of the race were a sprint, with Guerrero trying desperately to catch Unser. But it was not to be. Al Unser became the second four-time winner of the Indianapolis 500. As Mary Holman commanded the engines into life for the 72nd running of the Indianapolis 500 in 1988, the race itself held historic promise. The entire front row consisted of Penske cars, the first time ever in the history. Rick Mears was over the 220-mile-an-hour barrier with a qualifying lap at 220.457 and 4 laps at 219.8 miles an hour. But it was his teammate, Danny Sullivan, that jumped into the lead at the start of the race. Almost immediately, Scott Brayton and Roberto Guerrero tangled in the second turn. Neither driver was injured. Danny Sullivan led under the yellow. As they came back to green again, it was Sullivan in the lead, being chased by his teammates. Al Unser was tied with Ralph De Palma for the all-time lap record. Danny Sullivan slapped the wall just before the midway point in the race. Al Unser took the lead, breaking Ralph De Palma's record. Billy Vukovich III, the grandson of the two-time winner, was also running in mid-pack, a historic grandson in a historic 500. With 3 laps to go, Rick Mears was the leader. A part came off Michael Andretti's car, and the yellow flag came out. Anxiously, Roger Penske watched as Rick Mears scored his 3rd Indianapolis 500-mile race win. It was an unprecedented 7th win for Roger Penske, and the first championship run for the new Chevrolet racing engine.
Home again in India.
Throughout the history of the Indianapolis 500-mile race, millions of race fans have witnessed the dream. Thousands of sponsors, teams, and officials have participated in it. Nearly 600 drivers have risked everything to find it. Only 52 different drivers have emerged victorious. Their faces are cast in silver on the Borg-Warner Trophy, their names etched forever in time. 52 of the finest drivers in the world. 52 beckoning others to follow. The Indianapolis 500-mile race is, without question, the greatest spectacle in racing.